Ben Shapiro smirked, thinking he had her cornered. But within seconds, Jasmine Crockett turned the tables, shattering his argument, his confidence, and the silence of the room. Viewers watched in disbelief as America's fastest-talking pundit got dismantled, slowly, methodically, and publicly. Was this the moment the intellectual bully finally met his match? Before we get to this explosive moment, tell us where you're watching from, and if you believe truth still matters, hit subscribe. We've got another jaw-dropping story coming tomorrow. Ben Shapiro sat poised, fingers steepled, a smirk already curling at the corners of his mouth. He had done this before, too many times to count. His plan was simple: dominate the narrative with rapid-fire stats, reframe the debate before his opponent could breathe, and emerge with another viral clip to feed his fan base. His target this time? Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. He expected deflection. He expected emotion. He expected someone unprepared for the chaos he was about to unleash. What he didn't expect, what no one in the studio expected, was what came next. Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't roll her eyes. She didn't play into the performance. She simply let him finish, then leaned forward and asked, "Are you done misquoting me, or should I wait a little longer?" The air snapped. Viewers across the country leaned in. Shapiro blinked, caught off guard. "I came here to discuss facts," she continued, "but facts mean nothing without context, and without compassion." The crowd stilled. Even the moderator looked stunned. And then, Crockett delivered the line that set the internet on fire. "Ben, you don't scare me. You just talked fast." Gasps. Stunned silence. Then chaos. What was supposed to be another Ben Shapiro victory lap had turned into a masterclass in restraint, clarity, and truth. In less than 60 seconds, Jasmine Crockett flipped the narrative and left America asking one question. Had the king of conservative takedowns finally been dethroned? Before she ever stepped onto a televised stage, Jasmine Crockett was already known as a fighter. Not the loudest in the room, but the most prepared. A former civil rights attorney and public defender from Texas, she built her career in courtrooms where people's futures were on the line, not political careers. Her work wasn't about grandstanding. It was about grit, persistence, and protecting the voiceless. She defended clients who couldn't afford a lawyer. She stood beside families the system had forgotten, and she never backed down. When she ran for Congress, many underestimated her. They saw a woman of color, young, composed, and assumed she'd play it safe. They didn't expect the legal precision. They didn't anticipate the steel behind the smile. And they certainly didn't imagine that she would become one of the most fearless cross-examiners on Capitol Hill. But Crockett's rise was no accident. Every time she spoke in committee hearings, she came armed with receipts. While others ranted, she researched. When her opponents interrupted, she waited, and then delivered facts like closing arguments. She didn't chase headlines. Headlines chased her. And in a sea of partisan theater, her calm logic and brutal honesty became her signature. What set Crockett apart wasn't just her knowledge of the law, it was her emotional intelligence. She read the room. She let her opponents dig their own holes before lowering the rope of truth around them. Her supporters admired her restraint. Her critics feared her timing. And slowly, the national spotlight began to shift her way, not because she demanded it, but because she earned it. So when the producers invited her to sit across from Ben Shapiro, they knew exactly what they were doing. They wanted drama. They wanted sparks. They wanted ratings. What they got instead was something rare, a real political mind backed by lived experience, unshaken by spectacle. And that's exactly what she brought with her into the studio, along with years of battle-tested wisdom. Jasmine Crockett wasn't walking into an ambush. She was walking into a familiar arena. Only this time, the lights were brighter and the opponent faster. But she had faced worse. And this time, America would be watching. Ben Shapiro made his career weaponizing speed. In debates, on podcasts, across college campuses, his strategy has always been simple: talk fast, overwhelm, and leave no space for rebuttal. His followers call it intellectual domination. His critics call it rhetorical bullying. But either way, it's been effective, until now. Ben's rise wasn't built on compassion or curiosity. It was built on control. He mastered the art of rapid-fire argument, framing every conversation as a trap. His voice became a machine gun of soundbites, facts, figures, half-truths, and spin. He knew how to steer conversations away from nuance and into outrage. His goal was never understanding, it was victory. But in recent years, cracks started to show. The public began to see the formula. The speed covered the weakness, not the strength. And when someone refused to be rattled, his act started to wear thin. Beneath the polished persona and rehearsed indignation was something far more fragile. A man terrified of losing control. That's why the Crockett booking mattered. He had mocked her in past segments, calling her a Twitter congresswoman and dismissing her as another radical leftist. His fans expected another takedown, but his producers wanted something more. Conflict, yes, but also credibility. Shapiro hadn't faced a real political strategist with courtroom experience in years. They thought he could handle it. What they underestimated was Crockett's preparation. She didn't just know what he'd say, she knew how he'd say it. She studied his cadence, his baiting tactics, his favorite interruptions, and most dangerously, she knew how to make him slow down. Ben had always thrived when his opponent was either too emotional or too intimidated to push back effectively. But Crockett was neither. He wasn't there to win applause. She was there to expose what his speed tried to hide: flawed logic, partisan exaggerations, and a deep disconnect from the people most affected by the policies he defended. And for the first time in a long time, Ben Shapiro would be forced to do something he hadn't done in years: answer a question slowly, clearly, and without a script. Ben Shapiro leaned into the microphone, his voice crisp and clipped. "Congresswoman, explain how expanding government control has ever helped the communities you claim to represent. Don't progressive policies just trap people in poverty?" The conservative crowd nodded, ready for another takedown. This was Ben's arena: fast, combative, and unforgiving. He thrived on speed, on overwhelming his opponents with a barrage of talking points before they could breathe. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She paused. Not from hesitation, but calculation. "You love to speak about poverty," she replied, "as if it's a personality defect. As if policy doesn't shape who suffers." A hush swept across the room. Ben raised an eyebrow. "You talk about personal responsibility," Crockett continued. "But what responsibility does a government have to the people who fund it with their labor and their pain?" Ben jumped in. "So your answer is more government?" "No," she said, measured. "My answer is functional government, honest government, the kind that doesn't use soundbites to replace accountability." The crowd shifted. "See, you argue like poverty is a math problem. I treat it like a courtroom exhibit. Real people with real names and real stories." Ben scrambled for his next card, but she leaned forward. "You ever met a mother who rationed insulin so her child could survive?" "I have." Murmurs broke out. "You ever watched a veteran sleep under an overpass in a red state that cut mental health funding?" "I have." Ben opened his mouth but said nothing. "This isn't a podcast," Crockett said. "This is America." She ended her sentence like a gavel strike. The audience was stunned. The moderators looked unsure. Shapiro, for once, didn't have the final word. He adjusted his tie, but Crockett was already on her next point. The tables had turned, and the nation was about to witness what it looked like when a fast talker got outpaced by the truth. Ben Shapiro wasn't used to losing control of the narrative, especially not on a stage like this. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't playing by his rules. She didn't rush to speak. She didn't stumble under pressure. She waited for his next punch, and then countered like a surgeon, not a fighter. Ben tried again. "Congresswoman, you say you want accountability, but where's the accountability for rising crime in your own party's cities? Chicago? New York? San Francisco?" He smiled, thinking he'd landed a blow. Crockett nodded slowly. Let's talk about accountability, she said. But let's be honest enough to include context. The room leaned in. You're pointing to cities while ignoring red states with the highest poverty, maternal mortality, and gun deaths per capita. But sure, cherry-picked headlines, if that's easier than policy. The moderator blinked. Ben interjected. So now statistics are racist? No, Crockett replied. Selective outrage is... The audience gasped. Ben shifted in his seat, glancing at his notes. He leaned into culture war territory, attempting to bait her with comments about DEI programs and identity politics. Aren't we sacrificing merit for representation? Crockett didn't blink. What's merit without access? What's excellence when the starting line isn't equal? Ben fired again. You want equal outcomes? No, she said. We want a fair race. Now the crowd was nodding with her. Because here's what you're missing, Ben. When we talk about justice, equity, dignity, we're not asking to be handed anything. We're asking to not be blocked at every turn. Ben scoffed. Blocked? You're a sitting Congresswoman. Crockett nodded. Exactly. And I had to fight 10 times harder to get here. And I still walk into rooms where I'm assumed unqualified. The silence was deafening. In that moment, it wasn't just a debate. It was a reckoning. Ben's script was failing, his rhythm broken, and Jasmine Crockett was only warming up. Ben Shapiro leaned forward, visibly flustered, trying to regain control. You're a lawyer, Congresswoman. You know how laws work. Feelings don't change facts. Crockett didn't flinch. She turned to him calmly. Facts without humanity are how injustice becomes law. That line stopped him cold. He blinked. The audience murmured. Ben tried to pivot. The problem with your side is that everything becomes emotional. Crime, borders, education. You turn complex issues into victim narratives. Crockett's voice lowered, more deliberate. Ben, what you call a narrative, I call lived reality. Mothers burying sons is not a debate tactic. It's trauma. Families losing health care because of bad policy isn't emotional manipulation. It's survival. Shapiro opened his mouth, then paused. There was nothing in his index of repressed retorts for that. Crockett continued, slowly. You can talk fast and cite every article you want, but if you can't acknowledge suffering, then your facts are just armor. That line struck like lightning. And then, without raising her voice, Crockett delivered the moment that would echo across America. You debate for applause. I fight for people who don't have a mic. That's the difference between a brand and a purpose. The room went still. Ben swallowed hard. A visible shift happened, not just in the audience, but on the faces of those who came to see her lose. He looked toward the moderator, silently pleading for a pivot, but it was too late. Jasmine Crockett had flipped the stage. No yelling, no theatrics. Just a scalpel-sharp indictment of privilege masked as intellect. A few rows back, someone whispered, "She just ended him." By the time the segment wrapped, Ben's shoulders slumped. His words were clipped. The confidence, the cadence, it had all crumbled under the weight of authenticity. And as the cameras cut away, everyone watching knew this wasn't just a debate lost. It was a mirror shattered. As the studio lights dimmed for the transition, a hot mic caught Ben muttering, "This wasn't how it was supposed to go." It wasn't. He'd walked in expecting applause, dominance, another viral victory. Instead, he'd been deconstructed by someone who didn't need to raise her voice to raise the stakes. Jasmine Crockett didn't just win an argument. She exposed a pattern, a culture of talking over, minimizing, and distorting truth. And in doing so, she didn't just break a man's rhythm. She rewrote the rhythm of the entire political conversation. The silence afterward said everything his next podcast episode never could. Jasmine Crockett didn't need to gloat. She let the silence following her final words in the debate linger like the toll of a bell. Then she did something Ben Shapiro didn't expect. She pulled out a small stack of papers and calmly placed them on the table between them. "You want to talk facts, Ben?" she said with clarity. "Let's talk receipts." She flipped through documented policy reports, voting records, and transcript one by one. "Here's a list of every bill I've co-sponsored aimed at improving healthcare access in Texas," she began. "Here's your own show transcript from July 2022, where you mocked the idea of expanding Medicaid while citing a misleading Heritage Foundation study that's been debunked by 3 independent economists." Ben squinted at the pages, but the camera was already zooming in, catching the headlines, the highlights, the dates. The moderator shifted nervously. This was no longer just a debate. It was a dismantling. Crockett continued, undeterred. "You said systemic racism is a myth. Let me show you DOJ data on sentencing disparities. You said gun reform wouldn't save lives. How about this CDC study showing states with stricter gun laws have lower child mortality?" The audience grew quieter with each citation. Ben's signature snark had vanished. He reached for a rebuttal but found only silence. Crockett didn't yell, didn't grandstand. She simply exposed the scaffolding of his argument, held up by partisan repetition, not grounded research. Then she pivoted, just slightly, and spoke to the people watching at home. This is what happens when you actually read the bills, the data, and the footnotes. This is what happens when your job is to serve, not perform. Ben looked cornered. The tone of the room shifted entirely. There was no laughter anymore, no performative clapping, only stillness, and a growing realization that this wasn't the episode anyone had expected. Crockett finished the segment with a line that was pure ice. "I'm not here to entertain. I'm here to correct the record for every family that's been lied to by bad-faithed actors posing as political thinkers." And just like that, the reversal was complete. What began as a setup for Shapiro to dismantle a congresswoman turned into a national masterclass on how preparation, truth, and discipline beat bluster. He blinked hard. She didn't. The moment belonged to her, and the public knew it. As the moderator attempted to redirect the conversation, Crockett politely interrupted. "You see, this is what always happens. When someone with facts walks into a space built for spin, the conversation has to change, or it falls apart." She pointed directly to the camera again. "And if you're watching this thinking I'm being too aggressive, ask yourself, why does truth feel confrontational when you're not used to hearing it?" People online began clipping her every sentence. Hashtags formed mid-broadcast. She leaned forward, poised, composed, relentless. "I'm not afraid of the noise, Ben. But I do fear what happens to this country if we keep mistaking loud voices for honest ones." Ben Shapiro adjusted his tie and leaned forward, launching into a rehearsed line about economic freedom and personal responsibility. "Congresswoman Crockett," he said with feigned patience, "the issue isn't whether people are struggling. It's whether they're being told they're victims instead of being empowered to lift themselves up. That's the poison progressives inject." Jasmine didn't blink. "You mean the poison of making sure children don't die in cold apartments during a blackout? Or that working parents get paid fairly instead of being told to bootstrap their way through 3 jobs?" Ben tried to pivot. "I'm talking about the messaging, not the circumstances." "That's the problem," she said, her voice cutting like glass. "You're always talking about the message, the optics, the spin, while people are bleeding out in emergency rooms because your party won't expand Medicaid." A stunned pause. The crowd didn't clap, but leaned in. "You want to debate ideology," she continued, "but I'm talking about reality. In my district, a grandma skipped insulin this week to buy her grandson shoes for school. That's not a talking point. That's what freedom really looks like under your policies." Ben reached again for familiar ground. Crime stats, border fear, the mythical boogeyman of critical race theory. Crockett didn't flinch. "You throw numbers around like grenades, but you never pick up the bodies afterward," she replied. You say you care about crime. Where's your support for gun background checks? You say you care about education. Why do you back banning books and slashing teacher pay? Shapiro's voice rose. We're trying to protect children. So am I, she cut in. From poverty, from violence, from a future where facts are optional and cruelty is the currency. There it was, the fracture. His smirk faltered. He tried to reset, but the narrative had flipped. Crockett wasn't playing defense. She was holding court. A courtroom veteran, a community advocate, a policymaker with receipts. Every time Shapiro launched a theory, she countered with a lived experience. When he brandished fear, she answered with clarity. And then came the turn. Ben, she said, quieter now, leaning just enough to make him lean back. You've built an empire convincing people that shouting makes you right. But I've built a life helping people survive what your policies leave behind. The audience didn't just hear that, they felt it. Shapiro's lips parted, searching for a quip. But the studio energy had shifted. The room wasn't hanging on his pace anymore. It was hanging on her purpose. Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Your words move markets, she said. Mine bury loved ones. Silence. That's the difference between a podcast and public service. With that final line, she turned back to face the crowd. Not to boast, but to remind them that truth doesn't need speed. It needs courage. And for once, Shapiro had nothing left to say. Ben Shapiro leaned forward, still gripping his notes, trying to recover. Congresswoman, it's easy to make speeches, but real governance is complicated. You talk about values? Let's talk about outcomes. Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She folded her hands on the table and met his gaze with surgical calm. Great, she said. Let's. She reached beneath her chair and pulled out a worn binder, marked with yellow tabs, scribbled notes, and dog-eared pages. This is what I brought today. Not soundbites, not slogans. This is the real-life outcome of the policies you dismiss. She opened to a page and held it up to the camera. A photograph of a crumbling public school in South Dallas, with a hole in the ceiling and mold creeping down the walls. This school serves 98% Black and Latino students. It receives a third of the funding of a suburban school less than 10 miles away. But apparently the real problem in America is that I hurt your feelings on a podcast. Laughter and gasps rippled across the studio. Even the production crew looked stunned. Here's another outcome, Crockett said, flipping the page. This is Denise. Her baby died in childbirth last year because the only hospital near her had shut down its maternity ward. And you, Ben tried to interject. But Crockett continued, not louder, just clearer. You said, Democrats exaggerate Black maternal death rates to push a narrative. You said that, on air, on record. He looked shaken. Cornered. And one more, she said, voice still even, but now filled with gravity. This is Marcus. She held up a photo of a teenager in a football jersey, shot by a police officer who thought his phone was a weapon. His mother still hasn't gotten a trial. She got a funeral. The studio fell into a silence so thick it felt like gravity itself had deepened. Crockett stood. Not dramatically, just intentionally, like a verdict had been reached. She faced the camera and said, This is the America I represent. These are the families I fight for. And if that makes me the villain in your story, Ben, maybe your story needs rewriting. Ben Shapiro sat motionless, his note cards limp in his hand. He opened his mouth, but no sound followed. Jasmine turned slightly and delivered the final blow with a half-smile sharp as a blade. Next time you invite a congresswoman to your show, don't bring a script. Bring respect. The crowd erupted, not in cheers, but in stunned awe. The moderator blinked, unsure how to proceed. And on screens across the country, millions watched what would become known as the moment Ben Shapiro lost control not of the conversation, but of the narrative. The clip hit the internet like a meteor. Within minutes of the broadcast ending, Crockett mic drop was trending #1 on X. The video of Jasmine Crockett standing calmly holding up pictures of Marcus, Denise, and that decaying public school wasn't just a clip, it was a reckoning. The final line, "Next time you invite a congresswoman to your show, don't bring a script. Bring respect," looped endlessly across timelines, TikToks, and Instagram reels. Proof accounts were the first to pounce, calling it the most controlled demolition of a pundit ever caught live. House and Piker tweeted, "Jasmine Crockett didn't just debate, she educated. That was public service in real time." Joy Reid posted, "There are levels to this. Congresswoman Crockett just showed the nation what power looks like when it's focused, righteous, and female." House and Piker labeled it the single best political takedown of 2025. But what surprised everyone was the silence from the conservative side. Normally quick to rally around Shapiro, big names like Matt Walsh, Candace Owens, and Tucker Carlson hesitated. Their feeds went dark or pivoted away. The damage was already done, and defending Shapiro's performance meant confronting a truth even they couldn't spin. The optics were bad, the facts were worse. His composure had cracked, and the internet didn't forgive that. By the first hour, the video had 5 million views. By noon, 20. It wasn't just a viral moment. It was cultural whiplash. People weren't just watching the takedown, they were re-evaluating the entire conversation around values, performance, and political integrity. Conservative users with large followings started posting anonymous polls. Did Ben go too far? Was Jasmine right? They didn't tag Shapiro. They didn't have to. Twitter exploded with pride. "She said what we've all wanted to say for years," one user wrote. "She walked into that lion's den and made the lion apologize." Other users shared their own stories of being underestimated or dismissed, tagging Crockett and calling her the people's champion. Artists began sketching illustrations of her on the MSNBC set, arms folded, flame in her eyes. Students began using her quotes in debate prep. Political science professors played the clip in class the next morning. Even educators and policy experts weighed in. "This wasn't a debate," one wrote. "This was a masterclass in lived experience confronting hollow ideology." And for once, America didn't just watch, it listened. The backlash didn't stop at social media. It ripped into institutions that had long insulated voices like Ben Shapiro's. Within 24 hours, 3 of Shapiro's largest sponsors, an energy drink company, a defense tech startup, and a major publishing house, quietly pulled their ad campaigns from his podcast and video platforms. Though none gave formal statements, internal emails leaked by industry insiders made it clear, "We cannot be associated with rhetoric that risks alienating Gen Z and minority consumers." Daily Wire, where Shapiro served as editor emeritus, went into damage control. Staff meetings were held behind closed doors. PR consultants were flown in. Subscribers began canceling en masse, some citing Crockett's interview specifically. One leaked Slack message from an executive read, "We didn't lose a debate. We lost control of the narrative." Universities and debate organizations began reconsidering their partnerships. Shapiro had long been a fixture on college campuses, but now, student-led protests erupted ahead of his planned events. Petitions circulated, and its university administrators faced mounting pressure. How could they promote someone whose credibility had been so publicly dismantled? Even within the conservative political sphere, the tone shifted. Senator Josh Hawley declined to defend Shapiro on Newsmax. "I believe in vigorous debate," he said, "but we must also be prepared when the facts challenge our assumptions." That veiled critique echoed through donor circles and think tanks. Funding for youth outreach programs tied to Shapiro's foundation saw unexpected delays. Meanwhile, MSNBC's ratings soared. The Readout's interview became the most watched segment of the year. Network execs greenlit a follow-up special, while political strategists scrambled to capitalize on Crockett's moment. Democratic fundraisers cited a 22% surge in small-dollar donations after the broadcast. And for Crockett? Congressional committees began offering her a larger platform. She was invited to keynote national education and justice forums. Her office reported receiving over 80,000 emails of support, many from Texans outside her district. What began as a Fox News-style ambush had backfired so completely that it reshaped political media's ecosystem. No longer could platforms count on volume to overpower truth. The institutions had felt the shift, and now they were adjusting accordingly. Jasmine Crockett leaned into the camera, her voice steady but charged with conviction. This was never about me. This was never about winning a debate or going viral. This was about truth. It was about reminding America that intellect, integrity, and real service still matter, especially when our platforms have been hijacked by noise and spin. She paused just long enough for the silence to land. I represent the people of Dallas. I represent voters who know what it's like to be overlooked, dismissed, and told they don't belong in the conversation. And I won't apologize for bringing their voices into every space, whether it's a courtroom, a congressional chamber, or a national broadcast. She continued, unwavering. You heard a lot about values tonight, but let's talk about what real values look like. Real values don't condescend, they don't mock. They don't pretend that fast talk is substance. Real values sound like compassion. Real values mean accountability. Real values are about standing up for those who can't fight alone. A deep breath. Then her voice sharpened. So if you're tired of soundbites that replace facts, tired of arrogance masking as authority, tired of seeing smart people talked over while others just perform, then I have a question for you. What are you going to do about it? Her gaze pierced the lens, making every viewer feel personally seen. Maybe it starts by questioning the voices we've been told to trust. Maybe it starts by amplifying the ones that have been ignored. Maybe it starts by realizing that winning isn't about who talks the fastest. It's about who shows up with facts, who speaks with purpose, and who fights like their community depends on it. She smiled slightly, not with triumph, but with resolve. This is your moment too. If you're ready to demand better, from your media, your leaders, and yourself, then stand with me. Let's rebuild this conversation, word by word, truth by truth. Let's redefine what leadership looks like in this country. Her final words echoed through the closing credits. Power doesn't have to lie. It can listen, it can learn, it can lead differently, and that's the America I'm fighting for.